Magic is found in every room, where people connect over a shared purpose. In this weekly podcast, Luke, Hannah and Chris explore the role of purpose, courage, mindset and culture in every leader's quest for transformational performance.
Hello and welcome to Magic in the Room. I'm Chris Province, and today we are really finishing up our series on strengths. As you know, all season long, we've been talking about intentional leadership and really getting explicit about our purpose, our values, how to leverage our strengths as we move through together this thing called life and find some fulfillment along the way. And so I'm just over the moon to welcome my friend Dillon Hargraves here to the studio today because he brings a ton of joy and fulfillment into my life. So we're going to get to know Dillon a little bit because his story is just one of strength. And it's a story that I think we'll all connect with and understand a little bit more about where strength can be derived and how to leverage those to ultimately live life 100%. So I'll kind of open up and say Dillon and I first met in Leadership Tulsa, class 64.
64,
yeah.
Hashtag best class ever.
Hashtag best class ever. So if you guys remember, Marquise Dennis was on here. He was also in Leadership Tulsa, class 64. Probably, if you need any more evidence that was the best class ever, there's probably 20 other people I can introduce you to. But no, I'm just thankful for you to be in here, Dillon. And then let's just jump right into it.
All right, let's go.
Let's just, because we're talking about strengths, and I just want people to hear your story. So, let's start at the beginning, right?
It's a very good place to
start. Kind of lay it out as your experience growing up. Like, what was that?
Yeah, sure. So my experience growing up was let's start at the very beginning. I was born at the City of Faith Hospital, which is at the Oral Roberts campus. It was the only hospital for a few years in the 80s, as I learned as an adult. Grew up, I was adopted at birth. So to go back a little bit further even, my biological parents were very young whenever I was conceived, and as a result, my mom decided to adopt me to a wonderful family here in Tulsa. Actually, in Catoosa is where I grew up. And I spent most of my childhood there until I was 16, and then a couple things happened at 16 that were really life-shifting for me. One, first, I guess that I had realized that my education was kind of plateauing, and I was seeking new education opportunities, and I decided to actually leave the school that I had grown up in, and I was going to take my chance at this new charter school called Tulsa School of Arts and Sciences. That was the first year that it started. So I went to TSAS, didn't know anybody except for one person. I was there for maybe a couple months, and my dad, who adopted and raised me, who was also born with, or wasn't born with technically, but was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes as a juvenile, was young, and actually had a kidney transplant 5 years before I was born, and had tons of health problems my whole life, but he passed away when I was 16. So all of a sudden, I was there, kind of floating, in a story about strength. This is the polar weakness. No guidance, no grounding, making all the wrong decisions for a season, right? But I had a strong community around me. I had my mom. I had a school that really valued who I was. A lot of grace was given to me through that period of my life. Went to Oklahoma State University twice, actually. Got a bachelor's degree in journalism, public relations, and I got a master's degree in entrepreneurship. And I worked as a career DJ for a long time, and I met my wife, Ashley, and we got married in 2011. And through the long and winding road of life, I had I took a left turn into education nonprofits, where I worked at Reading Partners as a site coordinator for a couple of years, and then transitioned into the literacy director at a small nonprofit here in West Tulsa called Neighbors Along the Line. Spent 5 years there, and about halfway through that tenure, my wife and I decided to start a hot sauce company, which was what I describe now as my first real entrepreneurial endeavor, because I went and got my LLC and started doing everything legit. So the DJ business, just for the record, was all just sole proprietorship, nothing formal. And so Baby D's was a real deal. We had a logo. We had a line of products. We grew into a tremendous success in the sense of we had probably 10,000 people who were customers, and we had at least 1,000 people who were raving fans.
Right.
And
they still ask for it.
They still ask for it.
When did you bottle the last bottle of Baby D's?
We bottled the last bottle of Baby D's somewhere towards, I think it was in October of 2020.
Okay.
And I'll be honest. So I still get asked for it almost I have to apologize for not making it at least once a week. Yeah. And I know everybody misses it, but the reality of this is that it also was never really a profitable business model. Mm-hmm. We grew, we sold a lot. We had tons of success in almost every way, except for, we were just never able to quite get over into the black. Which is just to say, we built a huge cash reserve whenever my wife and I were doing everything for free. Right. And we started paying employees, all that cash started going away on somewhat of a predictable schedule. Right. But I will say, fast forward to now-ish. Actually, let's just jump all the way to now, because we got a lot to talk about. I now have been connected with all of my biological family. I have a daughter, which is the launching point for me meeting the rest of my biological family. The day she was born, I found out about my biological mom and my 6 half-siblings through her. Met them, got connected with them, have a relationship with all of them. And then just last October, I met my biological father and his 2 sons and his wife, who I now all have a relationship with all of them. My brother, my oldest brother on my dad's side, actually was placed in Tulsa for a rotation for his physician's assistant program. He goes to school in Greenville, South Carolina. Placed in Tulsa, stayed with my mom who raised me, my adopted mom, and I hunted down the last unopened bottle of Baby D's in existence. So before this, I had only heard that the last bottle sold on eBay for something like $100+. Yeah. And I'll assume that's true. It could be a myth, but it came from reliable sources. But
we're not going to let truth get in the way of a good story.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
But I found one that was just through a friend that had an unopened bottle that let me. They gave it to me so I could give it to my brother. So he, as of March, received the last official bottle of Baby D's with the heat seal and everything on it. But I mentioned I had my daughter, and I've spent the last 4 years basically as a stay-at-home dad, and in the last 18 months. Due in no small part to our relationship, have been building out a peer discussion group for leaders with disabilities, which I launched in March and is finding some traction and some success.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, your heart for nonprofit, for helping people is always, it's just striking. And I think that's one of the first things we notice about, Dillon, as we, as I got to know him. Now, tell me, how did being fully able-bodied and white help you? Or is what I just said not true?
Yes and no.
Yeah.
So to answer that question is I've said to people, and I've said to myself, and I will say today that I was uh, raised, and not explicitly but implicitly, to always pretend like I was able-bodied and white, and if it ever was in question, because it would benefit me. And I think that as a result, I can certainly say that it has whenever I've been able to pass, right? But I think more to the question and the topic of today is to say that what has always kind of been the thorn on my side whenever I'm in those situations is to say that it discounts the strength that I've had to possess to get to that point.
There we go. And so what's the truth of your story?
So the truth of my story is to say that I was born with what's called a right hemiparesis. It's under the umbrella of a lot of different medical terminologies for physical disability. It's most akin to cerebral palsy, but I prefer now, when telling my story, to say it was like I had a stroke in utero. Which is to say about 5 months of pregnancy, 5 to 7 months of pregnancy. My mom doesn't really know what happened. She may or may not have been sick. She wasn't really taking care of herself. She didn't tell anybody she was pregnant until she was 7 months pregnant. And she was 14 years old. Right. So I mean, this is not in any way attempted to put any kind of guilt or pressure on her. She was doing her best, absolutely.
Right.
And I love my mom very much, both of them. But it created a body for me where my brain doesn't send strong nerve signals to the right side of my body. As a small child, I was in physical therapy all the time. I had a season where I was wearing braces on my right arm and leg. I just I'm a part of disability groups now, and I just recently was able to celebrate with somebody who had just tied their shoes for the first time, like an adult, right?
Yeah.
And they said, I don't know if it sounds stupid or not. I said, that does not sound stupid, because I even though I was able to start doing that as a relatively young child, like that effort just to tie my own shoes is something that is not lost on me even today, right? Which is just to say is that with my body, I wasn't able to do a lot of the things that I wanted to do that my able-bodied peers could do. That's most illustrated, I think, in my own memory in a couple ways, because I wrestled, I played sports, and one thing was the 1 week I tried track and field, I remember in a run that we did, that even the heavyweight would beat me in the run, like the biggest guy in school, I was like, oh man, this is not good. I'm a tiny dude and I should be quick. And I wrestled for 2 years and I never won a bout, right? And I remember like one match I was like, I can certainly beat this guy, and I definitely did not, right? But the other part of that is to say is, I'm an ambiguously brown man. So most people who are of Mexican descent just automatically speak to me in Spanish. Most people who are African American or Black have lots of questions, and it's one of my favorite things to do of all people to say, "What do you think?" Because I've gotten every answer under the sun, and by and large, and this is just contextual, I think white people fall into two categories. One of just like assuming that I'm white because they assume everybody's white, that is not like of the shade that they believe is not white, or just not white. Right. And so the reality of that is, my truth is that I was born to a mom who was, standard South Texas white, and my dad was half Black and half Mexican. So I'm a quarter Black, quarter Mexican, half white.
Gotcha.
So I'm a blend of all these things. My wife actually is Osage. And whenever we did the last census, we got selected to do like the advanced census, which is just to say you have to handwrite in like all the details. And when we got to when I got to my daughter, I just wrote in contemporary North American. So
Right.
I was like, I do not know how to break it down any further than I already have for my wife and I.
Right. There we go. Oh, I love that. And so there's all these different dynamics, right? It's being adopted, being brown, being not fully abled, right? The absent father, right? There's all these things that put challenge in your now, like literally every day. I get up, in one of our promo videos, it shows you like going through your morning routine, right?
Mhm.
And it strikes me because I get up, I jump in the shower, I pick up the shampoo, squirt it in my hand, rub my hair down, done and done, right? Grab the towel, dry off. And like watching you go through your morning routine, like from the minute you get up, your day is different than somebody that's fully abled. And I think there's a lot of times I want to kind of unpack this idea of ableism with you, because I think that really leads into Saunter more and why that's so important. But if you can just kind of walk us through, like, what is the idea of ableism, like that's the systemic belief or how things are set up, and how it's not how everyone experiences the world.
Yeah, certainly. So, I could have brought my notes, but I'm going to go off the cuff.
That's right.
So I will lead by saying that I have the benefit of serving a wonderful organization called the Julian Way that has an amazing training on ableism, but that I've taken. So I'm going to do my best to honor what I have learned, noting that today is a new day.
Right.
But if you want to dive deeper, I can promise you I can point you in the right direction, because it's complex, right? So
Mhm.
there's different models of disability. There's the medical model, which is
Mhm.
just to say is that disability is a medical condition, which is to say that what I was raised in PT and OT and was to say is that I had a condition that could be, if as best as possible, could be cured through a medical diagnosis, and then the resulting therapy or prescription, right?
Mhm.
How is that harmful? I'm going to kind of just unpack these as we go. One of the things that how that manifested as ableism in my life was to say is that I, like I said, had at one point in time, I also have flat feet, but I at one point in time had cast on my arm and leg, and I've always had inserts in my shoes. And even though I had, for a season when I was in high school, had sports orthotics, I have eventually, before I went to college, got cast for these hard plastic orthotics. Just went to the podiatrist, got my cast, put them in my shoes, and never thought about it again for years. Until one day, I was actually in Chicago visiting a friend, and we were walking to a Blackhawks game, and it was 2 miles away. And I was 24 at this time. Yes, 24 at this time. I had to stop and take a break because my feet hurt so bad after a mile into that walk. I had to literally sit down on the side of the sidewalk. And as somebody who's 24 years old that can't even walk a mile, like not even running, not a fast paced or anything like that, like I just accepted that those inserts for my shoes were what I was supposed to be wearing. Fast forward, I started asking questions, found a different podiatrist who said absolutely not, got me into some good things, also started me to, this goes back to my morning routine, said, hey, I think it would help you if you swam. Okay, so I started swimming. And he just said 30 minutes a day. I've augmented that into a very specific routine that we're not going to unpack right now. But that's to say is that now I don't have to wear any inserts at all, because I learned to challenge that medical model of disability, which was to say is that this was the solution to my problem, was just to have these hard inserts, because my doctor told me to go there. This is what the people gave me. And at that point in time, I wasn't conditioned to ask any other questions.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I couldn't walk.
Yeah. And it's that idea that the medical model says that disability is a medical condition that can be treated with medical things. Right. And so what other models exist?
So another model is the social model of disability, which is just to say that that disability is more uh, a condition of social restraints that are based around things being designed for what is seen to be the general public does not include people of unique or diverse embodiments or disabilities, and as a result, they are removed from interacting in general civic experience in life.
Yeah. So we could talk about how wide aisles are,
Right.
or the distance between chairs or tables, or the presence of stairs or other physical barriers. Maybe it's the width of sidewalks, things like that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So certainly we can see where that presents challenges. Right? And
Right.
so what that's saying is in that social model, there are a lot of constraints that exist within the environments that we operate within that do not allow for inclusion of people that are not fully able.
Right.
Okay. What else is there?
And I believe the and again I'm going to consult my notes and try to correct the record if I need to. But the cultural model is the final one. And that's the one to just say is that culturally it's a matter of how we define normal.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just to say is that what makes my body abnormal and your body normal, and
Right.
and how do we redefine it to where we can both be normal as a culture and as a community.
Mm-hmm.
And that's ultimately kind of where we're heading in terms of the best practices that we know, and ultimately what I've learned through the anti-ableism training is that it comes down to, and this is where I think is a really good jump off point for the rest of the conversation, is it comes down to how you embody welcome and the idea of welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And that's to say is that culturally, the more we can welcome all bodies into our spaces and into our communities, into our teams, into our families, then we are addressing the culturalized ableism.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's creating the conversation around that culture, right? And how do we, where and how do we find belonging, I think is crazy important. But I think we can also find some common ground here, Dillon. And that's, we kind of hear your story. And I want to tap, before we get into Soundtra more, I want to tap this idea of, because of what you experienced, why you are perfectly outfitted to do great things. And yeah, I want to call you out a bit for saying, I've been a stay-at-home dad. Well, you've been a stay-at-home dad that volunteers for nonprofits, does mentorship for economic development and underrepresented entrepreneurs. You are a competitive bicyclist or cyclist, right? I guess that's what we call it.
Yeah.
It's been a minute since
It's
I've been on a bike.
We'll take either or.
You do reality TV casting. I mean, you are a little bit of a Renaissance man in that regard. So I think, you've done all of these things. I think you explore a lot of roles and you find joy in connecting with people within them, and always model the way for what you see does not define my capacity. And I think it's this whole idea that we lean on, that your physical ability does not determine your leadership capacity. And that's something I know we both rally around. But I want to go through a little bit of call it a hot seat, but I really want to work through this idea of the 5 domains of post-traumatic growth, why you're exactly outfitted to do great things.
Okay.
And I think, your story is yours, and I think we all have different traumas in our lives, right?
Uh-huh.
But I really want to spend a minute thinking, thinking through these domains and asking you a question, and we'll kind of move through them in 30 seconds or so apiece. But tell me, how have your challenges created greater appreciation for life?
I think my challenges have helped me create a greater appreciation for life because ultimately they have helped me really appreciate how valuable now is, and the reality that tomorrow isn't promised. So I think that's the big one for me, because ultimately, when you run through the list of all these things I do on top of being a stay-at-home dad, which, thank you for the recognition, I appreciate that. I feel heard and seen. But ultimately, why that doesn't feel like work, or why I think it's easy for me to glaze over that, is because my challenges have really distilled in me a sense of what it means for me to serve at my highest point of contribution. And there's nothing that I do now where I don't feel like I can show up and really serve at that point. Which I don't think that I would have had that ability to identify those things had I not gone through the challenges, because it's easy. It's been hard to learn what I'm not good at, but I've had to learn a lot of different ways what I'm not.
Yeah, and that's what I want to call out is like our strength, kind of moving through like in the post-traumatic world, like we do have a greater appreciation for life. It's exactly what you said. It's we contemplate value. So kind of valuing the hard stuff, the trauma that we've experienced, and how it informs why we contemplate. But walking through, tell me how these challenges have affected your ability to build relationships with other people. Kind of share that with me.
That's a good question, because I'm currently wrestling with that right now a little bit, in the sense that my challenges have helped me connect people better with people because I have more connection points of experience. But what I'm also challenged by is to say that I'm learning I'm at a point in my leadership journey where I'm learning to create space for other people's stories without thinking about how I can interject my experience in a way that's like, oh yeah, well, look what I can do, right? So that I would say it's a two-part answer. To say is that I have more connection points through my challenges, which is to say is that there's less that I don't relate to. Mm-hmm. Let me be specific and say that I don't often interact with people who I identify as an other. Mm-hmm. Right, as in not part of us.
Right. Yeah.
And but I think that a challenge it's an ongoing part of my learning process is how to not put my challenges on a pedestal in a way to say that oh, I've experienced that and my experience is the same as yours, or otherwise better or worse.
Yeah, and I think that connection though that's possible, like when you share authentically, to feel bound to you after a short amount of time is the standard, and I think people that have worked through a lot of those difficulties and embrace kind of the superpowers that they bring about, the ability to build close relationships, the gratitude, the appreciation for life, it's a powerful thing. But how has it informed what is possible, right? The personal strength, what have you learned about personal strength and achievement through the challenges you've experienced?
Yeah, that's a good one. What I've learned about personal strength is to say that there's a big part of my story that is fairly easy enough to glaze over, because it was a boundary I had to pass through. But a big part of that was marred by depression and anxiety and not feeling like I could perform to a high enough standard. being not good enough. But what I say is the post-traumatic growth, like, tipping point on that is to say, okay, I've gone through these things, I've learned from them, and I'm stronger because of them, and how that manifests in my embodied reality is a starting point is from that moment on the sidewalk in Chicago where I just couldn't take another step, to deciding I wanted to take more ownership of my body, right? And I have the privilege to be able to exercise and do these things, and to be intentional with how I use my time and energy and resources, as a way that leads me all the way to where I am now as a competitive cyclist, somebody who
or bicyclist,
or bicyclist, faster than you is what I call it.
Yeah.
But and most of those people in that world, unless we've spent a lot of time together, wouldn't identify me as somebody
Right.
who has a disability, right? And which is another challenge within the journey.
Right.
Because that's a way of not feeling that at times has felt like not being seen and heard, right? But ultimately, I would say the personal strength comes through the acknowledgement and ownership of my journey, in a way that says that, like, I'm more resilient, more robust from coming through this. And I would say that the one of the main benefits is the courage that you get to not feel like it's like you are it's hijacked on your path because of somebody else's behavior.
There we go.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that ability to not be distracted.
Yeah. So you can stay focused more despite other people's behaviors, because you have this a greater sense of personal strength.
Right. Okay, now tell me about how your challenges have informed your spiritual development, and a little bit about that process.
It's really informed my spiritual development a lot, particularly I'd say since my daughter was born. But ultimately, like, the journey that I've been on from a spirit with the spiritual orientation is that like most of us, a lot of us in the Midwest, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, like, I was raised in the church. I learned a lot about my spiritual life in that environment, which came with some real benefits and some real challenges. I'm really grateful for that experience, but also I learned I walked away at a particularly young age from always not feeling like I was going to be good enough to really actually get the spiritual rewards, right? And what I've learned over the the course of my leadership journey is to say that my lived spirituality is a lot more about faith and being able to show up and believe and believe big, and to accept the things that aren't in my control, and to take power of the things that are, and to not to let the rest stick around in my mind that much.
There we go.
There's a way to not be overly dogmatic about anything.
Yeah. You know what I love in that story? Like, being able to let go of this idea of everything's in my control, like accepting not everything is in our control, that, there is some higher power that determines what we get to be in control of, is an unlock to new possibilities. Because I'm able to unlock this idea that I can control everything, I can free myself from using that energy on those thoughts and focus on the things that I can. And in that way, open new doors.
The other thing I would add to that is that one of the big unlocks for me in my spiritual journey is a tightly held belief that we have everything we need.
Yeah.
Right now.
Right.
And the more I I live with that and sit with that, the more strength that I gain from it.
It's awesome. And I agree 100%. Like, we are 100% outfitted to achieve exactly what we desire to achieve. We have what we need. So thank you for walking through that. I want to call this out explicitly for our listeners to say, when we have a healthy perspective on our trauma, what we find are leaders that have an insane amount of personal strength because they are able to remain positive. They continue to seek meaning and fulfillment, and they explore ways to reduce suffering. Right? Like, it's huge personal strength. Post-trauma, like, people can build closer relationships. Post-trauma, we have a greater appreciation for life. Post-trauma, we are more readily able to see what is possible. And post-trauma, we're able to accept things and work through things spiritually that put us on a more productively oriented path. This isn't a Chris Province opinion. This is science stuff. So you guys we'll put a link to post-traumatic growth resources on the site here. But hopefully you guys, the listeners, have downloaded our strengths guide on magicintheroom.com and are following along. And kind of really what we're trying to do here is bring the idea home. Like, what are the different ways in which strengths can show up? Obviously, getting perspective from someone that has experienced life and processed the experiences that they've been through. And I think it's ridiculously rich. So I want to talk about Santamore and this idea, like, culmination of everything that is Dillon, and how, like, where are you directing your effort today? And, like, walk us through what you're doing.
Yeah, certainly. The seed of Santamore was planted, is now part of this, as part of the story. In around 2018, I was actually really into a lot of transcendentalist literature, specifically. So I got into, I'll walk you through it. It's a quick line. 21 Laws of Success by Napoleon Hill, which heavily quotes and references Ralph Waldo Emerson, which that lineage took me to Henry David Thoreau. I know there's some purists on how you pronounce his last name, but he has an essay called Walking. And in this essay called Walking, the opening paragraph, you can read. It's a short essay. You should read the whole thing, but at least read the opening paragraph, because he has this real romantic description of the saunterer, right? That's where I picked up the word. It's like, okay, so like this idea of the value of the saunter. And what basically that essay embodies is that we are part and parcel of the natural world. And so what that led me was a journey. What that led me through was a journey of understanding how I better interact with the world around me. And specifically, I actually used that same season of my life to make a commitment to being the best partner I could be in all my relationships, the most Christ-like partner I could be in all my relationships, to use specific language, which was a big, audacious goal for me. And it was also something that I knew that I could do tirelessly if I was able to clear, all of the stuff that was getting in my way. Like, I could commit to it, right? It's that one day at a time thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that today I can, put the value of my relationships above anything else. I knew that was going to mean that I was going to be more intentional with my relationships, specifically starting at home with my wife and with my mom, and eventually my daughter. What I wasn't prepared for was how much that was going to lead me on an internal personal journey of how do I better connect with myself.
Mm-hmm.
What I learned on taking through that journey was that that I had to actually spend a lot of time focusing on myself, and I had to reorganize where my energy went, and If you go on Santamore.us right now, you can see this video of my morning routine, and that's basically the outcome of years and years of trying to figure out what do I need to do so I can show up and be the best person I can be when everybody else gets up in the morning, right? Now fast forward to, okay, I've connected with myself, I've connected with my family. Like who else do I want to be in the room with, right? I mean, we'll go back 18 months, and it was me and you. And honestly, like I had my daughter, I had my mom, I had my LT64 peer group, and at the top of that list was you. Like I had a relationship with you, and I was satisfied by that. But I felt called. Also have a history of building community, both in my GED program, through my facilitation of performance events, and then at the peak of that mountain to date, it was the Baby D's, the hot sauce company, just a raving fan base of people. So I knew that I needed to. I was going to feel called back into creating community. What community did I want to connect with? I had met Justin with the Julian Way. I found that I had a lot of value. I was able to both give and receive value from this community. I also recognized through exploring the post-traumatic growth stuff is that I said, okay, if what we need in today's workforce, in the workplace, is our leaders who are prepared to lead radical transitions, which coming out of the last 3 years, what organization isn't experiencing some kind of radical transition or has in the last, months or years? The best people for those positions are going to people who have lived with a tremendous amount of challenges, specifically embodied disabilities. And so what I decided to do was to create this peer discussion group for leaders with disabilities, because what I had not found in my leadership journey was a vehicle that had been created with us in mind.
Right.
And so now my thesis is to say is that if we're going to create leadership tools that are the most widely accessible and will have the biggest impact, the people who are making them should be the people who have lived through these tremendous amount of challenges.
When we first talked and that whole idea came up of, okay, if take money off the table, what would you do if money wasn't a concern? And that idea of I would create community with people like me and unlock them, or expose things that I've learned or what science knows. And we could explore these things together and have a shared experience. And through that, we'd create bonds that couldn't be broken, and we could be there for one another. That was an inspiring story, right? And for me, I'm like, I definitely want to see this happen, right? So whatever role I could serve in, right, to see this actually become, I knew that that's where I wanted to be. And there's a calling element to it, right? Here's, two people that connected in a formal type of program, but that's been over for a while now, right? But it's this idea of how do we continue that connection? How do we continue to grow and do life together? And I'm just so ecstatic about what you're building with Santamore. So just can you tell people how they can find you and how they can learn more about Santamore?
Yeah, of course. So you can go on to our website, santamore.us. That's SAUNTERMORE.US. And you can email me at human@santamore.us. Otherwise, you can Google Dillon Hargrave, and you can find me directly and reach out.
Absolutely. And so highest level, what's the greatest good Santamore is going to achieve?
So the highest level, the greatest good Santamore is going to achieve is it's going to revolutionize the business consulting industry by creating the most powerful tools for businesses to transform their workforces. And I'm going to say to the tune of at least $1 billion in revenue.
Wow. And so breaking that down, what are the things you're doing next week that moves you toward that goal?
So what I'm doing next week that moves me towards that goal is I'm going to help unlock the tremendous amount of potential within the leaders that I'm currently have in my community, and encourage them to go forth and to act courageously in their families and their teams and in their communities.
Yeah. Walk me through that impact. Because ultimately it's the folks that are in your community that are going out into their organizations and families. Tell me kind of what are the methods you're using? How do you get together? What are the things you guys talk about? Where are you all at?
Yeah, so the methods are we meet once a month for a roundtable discussion that I facilitate. We cover things like how connection is an inside job, leading ourselves. So I'm automatically introducing these things that it took me longer than I want to admit to find out. I was like, oh wait, if I want to actually be like a better parent or a husband, I actually need to be a better Dillon to Dillon, right? So like introducing these concepts, working through them, and then also really trying to demonstrate to people that they're and so we do those in the monthly meetings, and then I meet individually with the participants of the organization or of the group to work through their individual goals and help them achieve breakthroughs that are meaningful to them every month, if not more often.
That's awesome. And so what's the feedback you're getting now? Like what's the reaction of the partners in that community? What feeling is it giving you?
Yeah. So I mean, the feedback, the early feedback has been very positive. For the people who have taken part in the program, they're walking away with a renewed, maybe either a new or renewed sense of power and control over their destiny. I feel, second question you asked, that people are walking away really understanding that they have what they need right now. And more specifically, what they need, they have in the room when we have our meetings. And that's to say is that everybody who's part of the discussion feels seen, feels heard, feels understood. And we are actively, fighting against the isolation that, has been really challenging for a lot of the people in our group, to say that, sometimes we just, the effort to connect is not being honored as much as it should be. And I think that we're creating a space where we really honor that effort, and that we feel connected in a very deep and meaningful way.
That's amazing. And I can't think of a better way to wrap our series on strengths than with this belief of we have what we need if we can only believe that that's true. We have what we need inside of us in the gifts that we are given, and within the connections we have with the people in the room with us, whether that's within our families, within our communities, or within our organizations. So finding those things, excavating those things that are already there, if only we can open our eyes to the beauty that exists. So, Dillon, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being you. And
to that point, thank you. And can I issue a challenge to your listeners?
You bet. Let's hear
it. All right. So
they're up for a good challenge.
So yeah, let's work on it. Let's get stronger, right? One of the best unlock tools that one of the things that brought me to you, right, it was to say, write thank you notes. Okay, be specific. I want you to think right now about somebody who's made a positive impact in your life, and I want you to think about what that action was that they took. I want you to think about how it made you feel, And I want you to think about how your life has been different after that. And I just want you to write it down and send it to that person.
Yeah.
And what I believe will happen is that if you write 10 of those, you are going to find one or two people who's going to respond to that in a meaningful way that's going to make you feel connected to them, and you guys are going to change the world together.
Right. Amen. As a recipient of one of those thank you notes, I got to think that's why we're sitting here today. So Dillon, I always appreciate your intention and what you do to make our world just a little bit better place. So thank you. This episode of Magic in the Room is recorded at Storycatcher Studios in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Our podcast is hosted by Luke Freeman, Hannah Broderroot, and myself, Chris Province. It's produced by Ben West. Our music is by Evan Grimm. You can find his music on Apple and Spotify. And check us out on magicintheroom.com or look us up as Purpose and Performance Group on your normal social networks. Thank you all so much, and until next time.